When observing contemporary computing culture, especially in relation to software development and the digital image, it's easy to become cynical. Open source software has attracted grifters and deceivers, while innovators find that their code bases are lifted, used for nefarious or criminal purposes. Further, the shift in digital cultures from decentralized to re-centralized paints a bleak picture, a dark Eden of stagnating innovation, limited code bases, and furthering corporate control. Although this digital dystopia threatens to smother us, there is a lighter side to collisions between art and science. These communities represent a sort of digital utopia, a place of pushing limitations, of innovation, and of resistance to corporate control. To explore this notion, we interrogate the Demoscene, an underground computing community of art and science. This paper represents an early attempt at building some sort of theory around Demoscene. That doesn't mean that we're unfamiliar with it. Tomasz Bednarz has been producing demos under the name of Warlock for quite some time, and as part of the group Amnesty. Although this paper is foundational, it does create a novel contribution, building up some academic theory around an area that is very unexplored, especially in relation to contemporary computing culture, and most readily as a sort of remedy to help us escape our dark Eden.
Demoscene emerged from the 8-bit computing underground of the late 70s. Demosceners produce real-time audiovisual productions using the creative and hacking skills of both coder and artist. They also push the hardware beyond its limits. Demosceners are driven to achieve impossible by pushing their machines through creative algorithmic programming and crafting inspiring generative art. When Demoscene began, Demoscener focused on the use of state-of-the-art home computers such as Commodore 64, Amiga, ZX Spectrum or Atari. Emphasis was placed on pushing the limitations of those machines, which has translated into the Demosceners of today using new hardware, as well as continuing to push and innovate on older systems. In addition to code, Demosceners also create music, zines and other media. The scene remains largely underground, but has recently gained more legitimacy within the cultural and artistic circles.
So to begin theorizing Demoscene without misrepresentation, we first need to ask some meaningful questions. We've started by asking what Demoscene's relationship to computing culture more broadly is. Rather than trying to compare Demoscene to other subcultures, we're interrogating Demoscene from a relational position, considering if Demoscene's functions within its own context reminds us of any other movements throughout time. We found that there's a lot to be said for Demoscene representing a certain modernist turn for computing culture. Coinciding with the home computer revolution, Demoscene propelled computing into a state of constant renewal and rejection of the past and limitations. Much like modernism, Demoscene represented an embracement of technology and a rejection of the immediate past. This lays some good groundwork for understanding how Demoscene functioned within the late 1900s. It doesn't say a lot for the position within Dark Eden. As we will explore, the Demoscene may now be taking on a cultural function within computing similar to that of which the Enlightenment did for the modernists. As the computing culture of today looks for a way to escape the Dark Eden we found ourselves in, we may look to our own relatively distant past. Just as the modernists looked to the boon of scientific, cultural, artistic, and intellectual advancement that marked the Enlightenment, so too might the computing innovators of today turn to the Demoscene. Now, while we understand that we may be presenting caricatures of both modernism and the Enlightenment, our emphasis in this paper is on understanding the cultural operations of the Demoscene and how it can better be understood through a lens of historical relations. Let's figure this out by first diving into Demoscene, examining it through the lens of its own context. Demoscene began as a community in the late 1970s and continues to this day. Demosceners themselves came from many different backgrounds and brought with them their own influences and skill sets. They adopted names, formed groups, and worked together as coders, artists, musicians, and swappers, those that would trade floppy disks full of demos and other content with other Demosceners, and thereby creating an international Demoscene network. Demoscene began as a predominantly youth subculture, with many early Demosceners lacking formal training in their craft. we begin to see linkages with modernism appear here. Morrison et al. Observed the enthusiasm of modernists such as F.T. Marinetti towards the expressive capabilities of new technology. And just as modernists like this were experimenting on the frontiers of their own tech, so too were the Demosceners.
Central to Demoscene is the actual artifact, the demo. Not to be confused for CGI animations, the demo is not a video or a music file. Instead, it is a piece of mathematically driven software run in real time to generate synchronized visuals with sound. A core element of the demo's aesthetic is its urgency. It is happening in the present, as the viewer engages with it. Demos were often made for show-off at demo parties, gatherings of demosceners, which would generally involve competitions. Whether made for fun or for competition, demos often follow certain restrictions. A common one being fitting inside 4KB file, or the one you're seeing on the right hand side 64KB file.
How restrictive is 4K? Well, the example that Tomasz likes to use is Douglas Adams' Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And here we're showing you all of what would fit into a 4K text file. We only just get introduced to the protagonist. Another example is the battle between the gods and the giants, which we've compressed down to 4.44KB, so it's still a little bit too big. And you can see that we've lost a lot of fidelity and a lot of detail in this image. But conversely, D.H. Lawrence's Sorrow fits into a mere 407 bytes. And we think this demonstrates some of the ethos behind Demoscene. What the poet has done with language, the Demoscener has done with code. In lieu of more concrete social or political focuses for Demoscene, this emphasis on restrictions and pushing past them becomes the inherent social criticism, present in what size limitations the Demoscener works within or what platforms they choose to use. We can see a mirroring here in the ethos of modernism, reflectively summarized by Ezra Pound as to make it new. Of course, being that there were, and perhaps are, many modernisms, there's been much debate over exactly what the new was. Was it art? Was it language? Was it the past? For Demoscene, this is perhaps easier to pinpoint. The hardware was being made new through a constant redefinition of its capabilities. The modernist's unrelenting self-propulsion towards renewal and invention is echoed in the Demoscene. We can also see aesthetic similarities between Demoscene and modernity. Pound mused that the new was not a mimicry of external life, but energy cut into stone. By similar virtue, Alexei Krushnik proclaimed that to depict the new, one needed totally new words and a new way of combining them. Our linkage between modernity and Demoscene is solidified here. Indeed, although Demoscene works are not devoid of natural imagery, much of Demoscene art is abstract. Demoscene embraced the new, the home computer, and instantly saw the need to push its potential, hurling the hardware forward into a constant state of reinvention through limit-defying work. The resulting imagery and the resulting sound that best showed off this experimentation and this pushing of limitations was generally abstract in nature. Like the modernist, the Demoscener was informed by their need to push limitations in their expression. They rejected and continue to reject the shackles of the past, becoming a force for the impossible. In this way, Demoscene most readily represents a modernist turn of computing culture. Discussing Demoscene as computing culture's modernist turn invokes other questions. Much like modernism, Demoscene's legacy has infiltrated popular culture and other art movements. Sangvist and Santama explain that while game development in Anglo-America may have developed out of electronic companies, and in Japan out of cultural industries, it was actually the Demoscene that helped create the game industry in Europe. Game companies like CD Projekt Red and Crow Team were both born of the Demoscene and retained those ethos in their practices. This aligns Demoscene, like other digital culture progenitors, with the avant-garde, a self-contained movement driving against the past in reaction to the contemporary, resistant to appropriation, and a barrier culture, one that leads into other industries and art forms, but without sacrificing itself. Demoscene's begetting of the game industry in Europe did not compromise its own form. It remains alive and well, practicing the same ethos with the same desires. although now informed by more recent computing. Speaking of the contemporary, we return now to Dark Eden. In recent years, open source software, that is software without any sort of copyright restrictions, and an encouragement for others to modify, expand on, etc., has gained a great deal of prominence, facilitated by version control services such as GitHub. GitHub runs on Git, one form of version control. Others include things like SVN. While open source software has done a lot of good, it also comes with its own dark side. Open source software has attracted grifters and cheats to development, looking to make a name for themselves with minimal effort. An extreme example is Hacktoberfest. This was an initiative devised to encourage people to develop open source software, and so offered you a t-shirt if you could prove that you contributed to something. This is a wonderful sentiment, but the result was many examples like this one. Users simply making superficial, low-effort changes to try and garner clout, not even actually changing anything but the README file. More disturbingly, many innovators have instead invested their time in the creation of deepfake or other questionable tech with little ethical responsibility. Then anyone can take and distribute this under open source licenses, which allows anyone to adopt these platforms and use them for whatever means. Moreover, open source software is now potentially facing the issue of centralization. GitHub was acquired by Microsoft in 2018, meaning one of the largest collections of open source software in the world was now owned by one of the largest tech companies in the world. While this situation is not indicative of everything going on, it does paint a grim picture for the future of computing culture. What becomes of computer science and computer art if this is the norm? What happens to software development if it becomes too strongly centralized? How do we encourage diversity of thought, innovation, and more in such an environment? It is at this point that our lens on Demoscene shifts from the modernist turn of computing's past to the historic Enlightenment of its present. In his interrogation of the Scottish Enlightenment and its relationship to modernity, Wickman suggests that it was the Enlightenment itself that the modernist was indeed making new. They were looking not to their immediate past, but instead to the distant one, to remedy the maladies of the contemporary. For the computing innovators of today, be they coders, artists, or both, that wish to reject the centralized and dishonest Dark Eden of computing, Demoscene may be their salvation. The Demoscene of 2020 remains. It is self-contained, it is self-sustaining, and it continues as a historical flashpoint of innovation. Demoscene's DIY attitude rejects anything to do with lifting code from others, with deceivers and code thieves within Demoscene branded as lamers. Further, Demoscene may in fact provide the next generation with the tools they need to resist centralization. The use of different computing hardware and the politics that come with picking an Amiga over a C64, over an Atari, or over a ZX Spectrum, they afford multiple approaches to Demoscene craft, and they allow Demosceners to resist service to a single corporate master. It might be this very resistance, this very DIY attitude that has helped Demoscene remain vibrant, an active community, while other digital communities of the same time have kind of fallen. We are not claiming that young software developers of today all try Demoscene, although we'd probably like that, especially Tomasz. We're just proposing that as we descend into our Dark Eden, that the next generation of innovative coders, artists, and generators might find some sort of creative resource within the practices and philosophies of Demoscene, much like the modernists did with their own distant pasts. We understand that we've painted Demoscene as a perfect world of pure expression, and the size of this presentation does mean a sort of caricaturing of modernism and the Enlightenment. Now, while this real-time utopia might be nothing but a naive dream, a reflection on its ethos and purity might prove enlightening.